Indeed, this story has its deep roots in the transatlantic slave trade and also the colonial exploitation of Africa and the current state of neocolonialism. We need to ask ourselves why, in spite of the fact that Africa has more resources than any other continent in the world, we have gold, we have diamond, we have bauxite, we have rivers, we have human beings, and so on. In spite of all that, many Africans are running across our boundaries into Europe. Why is this happening? And if you look at the facts, Europe itself is not out of the woods. I mean, the homelessness in Europe and the Americas and so on is phenomenal. There are many white Caucasian British citizens who cannot afford decent housing. You understand? There are many people in Europe who are unemployed. There are many people in Europe who have no access to medical service and so on. And yet our people are flooding into these areas and so on. I think it's important to ask the fundamental question, why? One of the reasons is that we have not as yet achieved the objectives of the independence movement. The independence movement in Africa, which was led by people like Osajifo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Modibo Keita, and others, was aimed first at ensuring that we control our own resources. Resources embedded in the soil and resources above the soil. It was aimed also at ensuring that we could elect our own leaders. Under colonialism, we didn't have a chance of electing our own leaders. And when these Western countries pontificate about democracy and so on, I laugh. When they came to Africa, our leaders were appointed by heads of governments in Europe and elsewhere. We couldn't elect our own head of state. The head of state here was the governor, who was responsible to the Queen of England. Even district chief executives were not selected by us. District chief executives were appointed by the Queen of England. Where was democracy in that exercise? They stole our lands, they stole our mineral resources, they stole everything that we had, you understand? To the extent that for hundreds of years, our resources were not exploited for our benefit and the interest of our people. This has led a huge development gap, which is largely responsible for the underdevelopment and poverty you find on the African continent. And this underdevelopment and poverty, which is driving our people to such desperation as to cross, the seas into Europe and so on. I think it's important also to pay some attention to the transatlantic slave trade. The people who were captured as beasts of burden to build the United States of America and other places were not the weakest. They didn't want the weakest. They wanted the strongest Africans, the young people. They wanted the intellectuals, the architects. Those with skills were those who were taken out of our country. And even if you look at the conservative estimates of 40 million people, that impact, we cannot overcome that impact only after 60 years of independence. So we are still grappling with that factor. But for me, the most important thing is not even our history. It's the fact that current African leaders are not doing anything to reverse the wrongs of the past. For me, the worry is that today, a country like Ghana, which is endowed with enormous gold resources and so on, gets only 2% of the value of gold that we export out of this country. That, for me, is a calamity. That, for me, is the reason why Africa is where it is today. For me, the fact that today, Ghana has only 13.5% stake in our oil and gas is responsible for this state of underdevelopment and desperation. The fact that African governments can sign the so-called, economic partnership agreement with the European Union, which clearly is inimical to the development of African people is my worry. The fact that African governments have become beholden, to the European powers who are responsible for our colonialism is, for me, the problem. How can anybody explain how in 2020 so-called French-speaking African countries are keeping their foreign reserves in the Central Bank of France? How can anybody explain to me how African countries are borrowing their own money? They are borrowing their own money and paying interest to France. How can anybody tell me that this is a sensible way of developing Africa? You understand? And our leaders are full of slogan mongering. When you hear the slogans they bandy about, they shout about it, so you think we are about to take off. It's all empty slogans. Empty. We need to take concrete action. The way to consolidate African independence, the way to mobilize African resources for the development of the African people is through unity. The building of a continental government under a system of government which frowns on exploitation, under a system of government which insists on collective self-reliance of the African people. That's what we are not doing. And that's why we're here. 20 people in just one incident, 20 Africans dead. Of course, the other dimension we have to look at is the deliberate effort of Western powers to destabilize Africa. Their adventure in Libya has ruined Libya completely. They were talking about the dictatorship of Gaddafi and made all kinds of allegations against Gaddafi and so on. Gaddafi's Libya is 1,000,000 times better than the Libya that the West has created today. Look at the level of insecurity. Look at the state of civil war. Look at the stealing of Libya's oil resources and so on. So they deliberately create this instability so that they can control us, control our resources, and drive us to desperation. And I want to see the emergence of another Nkrumah in Africa. I want to see the emergence of another Sekuturi and Modibo Keita in Africa. Because without that, we will continue to be where we are. Without that, our people will continue to suffer desperation and depression. Without that, our resources will be taken for a song. So we need to reorganize our societies. We need to focus attention on what our founding fathers put down in black and white at the end of the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester in 1945. When our founding fathers told us that Africa must be free, that Africa can change, that we, the African people, are the forces which can change Africa, and that we need to do that under the banner of continental unity and socialism. That's the only way forward. We are beating about the bush. Look at the suffering in our countries. You understand? Look at the suffering in our countries. Not too long ago, African leaders decided that our continent should be free from all foreign military installations. Today, African countries are jumping over each other to allow the establishment of foreign military bases. And what shocks me is that Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana has a U.S. military base stationed here. Why would our people not become desperate? In the 1960s, when the French tested an atomic bomb on the Sahara Desert, Ghana led that protest. Ghana first detected it, and Ghana led that protest against the explosion of an atomic bomb on the Sahara. And our position then as Africans was that Africa would never become the testing grounds of weapons of mass destruction. Our position then was that Africa would exert its independence and build on the basis of peace and economic prosperity for our people. What has happened to Africa since then? I'm scandalized by these stories. I'm scandalized by a leadership which is subservient to foreign interests. I'm scandalized by an African leadership which cannot do basic, simple things. Look at the rise of xenophobia in South Africa. Look at the rise of xenophobia in Nigeria. Look at what we're doing to ourselves as African people and so on. I'm disgusted by the current situation on the African continent.